Imagine for a moment our country elected a bunch of people who thought that rape should be legal. Now, these pro-rape politicians knew that simply coming out and proposing that we legalize rape would be toxic and odious and rightly inspire moral revulsion among the populace. So they say this instead. Look, we don't support rape, but we want to legalize unilateral physical intimacy. And after they say that, they set out to make sure that no one ever called rape, rape, but instead, in every instance, called it unilateral physical intimacy. It's pretty clear that if supposedly objective news sources, say, for instance, the New York Times, adopted that same language, they would be granting the pro-rape camp a monumental political victory. Unilateral physical intimacy is not a neutral phrase in our little thought experiment. It is propaganda, as ideologically phrased as the term welfare queen or Islamo-fascist. Well, the same is true for the pro-torture euphemism enhanced interrogation techniques. A new study out from Harvard shows that the torture apologists won the semantic war to redefine the term. The study from Harvard University's Shorenstein Center on the Press compared the way the major newspapers used to describe waterboarding before the Bush regime and how they described the practice afterwards. The results are eye-opening. From the 1930s to the last decade, the New York Times called or characterized waterboarding as torture 82% of the time. But from 2002 to 2008, that number dropped to 1% of the time, from 82% to 1%. The Los Angeles Times called or characterized waterboarding as torture 96% of the time before the last decade. And after 2002, it dropped to 5%. And the number of times USA Today called waterboarding torture or implied it was torture? 0. Confronted with this damning evidence that they had allowed a group of amoral thugs to bully them into complicity with systematic crimes, the response from the New York Times was shocking. A spokesperson told Yahoo News, quote, "As the debate over interrogation of terror suspects grew post 9/11, defenders of the practice, including senior officials of the Bush administration, insisted that it did not constitute torture. When using a word amounts to taking sides in a political dispute, our general practice is to supply the readers with the information to decide for themselves. Thus, we describe the practice vividly, and we point out that it is denounced by international covenants and an American tradition as a form of torture." The phrase enhanced interrogation technique was designed from the beginning to diffuse our moral circuitry. It's the job of an independent press to trigger our moral alarms. The New York Times and LA Times failed this basic test of duty. And they can begin to atone now with a simple, clear policy. Just call torture what it is. Coming up,